This will be a day long remembered. Now I am the master.
Welcome to another episode of Legends and Theories. And happy Tolkien Reading Day. This is one of the 2 days celebrating Tolkien and his works, which is this day specifically because this is a day that Sauron is defeated. And it is honestly just pretty interesting to go and do different Tolkien things today. Sure, there's going to be a lot more people talking about it, but thinking of stuff, I thought it was honestly going to be an interesting topic to talk about characters that, mainly due to the movies, are blamed a little too much for a single mistake that they made, where a lot of people think that they're not great characters or not good people because of it. And I'll be going on these from the ones who have their reputation least affected to the most. So there will be 6 characters I'm going to look at, 5 of them that directly appear in Lord of the Rings, one who I think, although isn't super judged, definitely would be if you just heard his actions on his own. And an honorable mention of someone who definitely should be blamed for their actions way more than they are. So let's go straight into that. And going into our honorable mention, he is the opposite of everyone on this list, where he's not getting as much blame put onto him or not thought as a bad person as everyone else is, and that is Feanor. And he's mainly remembered for creating the Silmarils. And while people know he did some bad things, it feels like that's not really talked as much about the character, and it's more talked about the fact that he does create the Silmarils, and that's if someone even knows who he is, that's probably the extent they know. But he crossed some pretty serious lines after he was, well, one, banished by the Valar to go and live out just outside of Valinor because of him getting into a pretty major argument based on Sauron's manipulations. He then went and swore an oath against Morgoth and went and committed multiple atrocities to go and try and get the Silmarils back, including the kinslaying, and then he went to continue on to burn the ships that he stole and not send them back, and then went to march on Morgoth. He was shortly killed after that, but yeah, he commits some pretty serious crimes and crosses just a lot of lines. He does some pretty bad stuff, but he's mainly remembered for just creating the Silmarils, so I really don't feel like he gets enough blame for it, and he's an honorable mention because he's kind of the opposite of everyone else on this list, who were generally really good people, but made a single mistake that people remember them for. Here's the opposite. He made a series of really bad mistakes, but is remembered for the greatest thing that he did. So let's go into the official list now. At number 6, I have Turin Tuinbar, and this is someone where I don't think he's blamed as much for stuff he goes through, especially when people know the reason. But if you just look at the facts of some of the things that happened with him, like him marrying his sister, him going and killing a good amount of his friends, and just causing an intense amount of death and destruction, it looks really bad for him until you are told the reason that this all happened, which is that Morgoth cursed him. And well, I do think, like, you could be blamed for some of these things where he misjudges things and it is just really bad luck. And if you look at really everything he did, the only one where you could just fully blame him on it was when he killed the one person he's suspected of lying to him, and that was more of madness and grief than anything else. Everything else was just it was just a really bad and unfortunate accident that he came across, basically just due to him being cursed, and with that, I really don't think you can blame him. And he definitely is the least of them because, well, one, most people don't know who he is, and most people who do know would know about it, specifically why this all happened to him, but there's always that person who just hears about this person's kind of feats and everything that happened to them, and it just doesn't sound great for them. But now to go into people that I think are blamed a little more because of mainly their portrayal in the Jackson films, or people, not fully understanding the characters. And to start that off, we have Frodo, and with Frodo, I think that this is generally not blamed on him too much, but I think I have heard of people going and saying that Frodo has failed, and he's not a great protagonist because of the fact that he wasn't able to destroy the One Ring, but it was just impossible for anyone to destroy the One Ring. Sauron knew that, and that was part of the reason he didn't have Mount Doom guarded. The another part was, well, he didn't think anyone would be um, capable of wanting to destroy it. And Frodo did that entire journey, made it all the way there, and only then, at the point where the ring's temptations would be the strongest, he just wasn't able to resist it. And from what it sounds like, from everything I heard from Tolkien's letters and other writings, that no one could have resisted it there, and no matter who had it, they would not have been able to willingly destroy the One Ring. The only way I think someone could have tossed it in would be if someone like Gandalf forced them to, and from everything I've heard, that would have just broke their mind and just completely destroyed them. So yeah, really, no one could have went and done that, and Frodo went and sacrificed his body, his mental health, and he just sacrificed really everything to save the world, and he was just forever wounded physically and mentally, and just wasn't able to recover in Middle-earth. He eventually did have to leave, and ultimately is a hero. It was a moment of weakness at Mount Doom, but he still has some solid feats. I think that some people do take that and hold it against him, but generally most fans don't. Although I do know some do, which is why he's on this list, but still towards the bottom of it because he is blamed by some, but most do understand what has gone on and don't blame him as a character and don't think he's that bad of a person. Now going on to our next one. This is one where I can really see, some justifications to it with the character of Thorin Oakenshield. And yeah, he sort of loses it towards the end where he kind of gives into his greed and doesn't want to really help anyone. He just wants to keep all the money for himself, and it definitely makes him look bad, and characters call him out on it. He also kind of loses it on Bilbo when Bilbo reveals he gave up the Arkenstone. But Thorin is ultimately still a great person. Like Frodo, he had just a really bad moment of weakness, but everything else he really did, and especially him going and sacrificing his life after he went and realized that he was acting poorly. At least, in the movies and the books, he immediately goes into battle, but both ways he realizes the error of his ways and that treasure isn't everything. Ultimately, it is just a nice story at the end, and I think that everything with Thorin, yeah, he is to blame and he does some, I'll fully admit, he does some really stupid stuff, and he definitely should be blamed for that stuff, but still, he is still ultimately a good person, and again, it's one of those people where some people blame him, but most realize it was just part of character development and growth, but don't hold against him fully. And yeah, I think him and Frodo are very similar. And then, on the other hand, the next three have a lot of similarities in, well, one, their moments of weakness and their affiliation, but are seemingly blamed a lot more harshly than really everyone else. With one, not as much, but he serves as a nice transition between the two. So let's go into him now. At number three is Boromir, and Boromir, honestly, he gets a lot of hate for trying to take the ring from Frodo, and, well, also always saying to and go through the gap of Rohan, but he also gets the one to simply walk into Mordor meme at least. But in all seriousness, a lot of people blame him mainly for his failure at the end. He does also have that moment of redemption where he realizes, and this is almost immediately after he falls into the sway of the ring, that he messed up and did something really bad. And he begs for forgiveness and is able to get it by sacrificing his life to save the hobbits. I definitely see a lot more stuff blamed against Boromir and him and one other character on this list are the main reasons that I decided to do this because I feel like they go and get a little too much blamed on them for everything they had to go through and just maybe judged on one really bad moment of weakness. But yeah, it is honestly just still a solid character of Boromir. He was just trying to do this all for his people, and in just a moment of weakness, he gave into the temptations of the ring. I don't fully blame him, and most fans don't, but there still is a good amount of them, and this is a lot more than really everyone else so far combined that do think that Boromir is not a great person and blame him a lot more for everything that has happened. But it's time to go and move into the two people that are thought of as at least pretty bad people, even though they are ultimately really good and noble people at heart. And Boromir was a nice transition because this is the one where, yeah, there's a good amount of people who think he isn't great, but still a good amount of fans do think he is good, which is what the kind of the first half of this was people realized were ultimately good, but did have flaws, but most people still thought as good. There was still a small minority of people who thought about that and thought they were bad characters, but it's time to get into the two that are thought of as really bad people, but really aren't, and they're about equal. But one of them is more or less just painted in a worse light due to the Jackson movies and once seen as particular, but also conversations about this character. But let's go into those two to look at the final two on this list. Going to number two, we have Denethor, and this is a character that just gets really blamed for everything that we see him do in the story, although everything before shows that he was a great person. It was just him suffering an immense amount of grief that caused everything in this. There are people who do understand that, but a lot more people just go and think that Denethor was always this kind of power, like mad character who really didn't want to go and cooperate with anyone. But that's because the Jackson movies do cut out a pretty important scene to his character development, and that is him going and having to use the Palantir and that driving him mad. We learn in the book that Denethor, for years, battled his will against Sauron's and the Palantir to try and see in on Sauron's plans and was always able to hold him off. Saruman was corrupted by it, and this didn't happen to Denethor. His will was stronger, and he was able to push back until he learned he lost Boromir. And through that grief, Sauron was able to affect him and drive him mad, and that mainly pushed him to do everything he did do. He was a great ruler for a while, and he was ultimately a great person and a great man, but just him losing his son pushed him into grief, and then him nearly losing his other son just completely broke him and just drove him mad through Sauron's influence. And everything he did was really just out of that breaking of his will by Sauron, and Sauron basically like pushing him to do it. So yeah, he is at fault, but he was pushed and was broken. he was ultimately still a good man and he was a good leader. He just suffered just too much and just had a complete breakdown at the end, which most people don't fully get. They just think that he was always this person, and it really was just hurtful to him as a character. And that's mainly because it wasn't touched on in the movies. People who have read the books go and know that he was broken by Sauron, but still, I think a lot of people just go and think that Denethor was a bad person overall and at all times, when he really wasn't. He was a good person for a majority of his life, and just in his final days, his will was broken by the second most evil being to ever exist in Middle Earth, so it really is understandable, and it is something that, most people don't get, mainly because of the fact that they never talk about how the Palantir was used against him by Sauron and used to break his will. Now going to number one, we have a character that, yeah, just fully was kind of done dirty by Jackson. Really one of the only ones that it happened to, besides the moment that Sam decided to leave Frodo, which would have never happened in the Sam that Tolkien wrote because Sam was by Frodo and loyal to him at all times, and there was nothing that was going to get Sam to leave even temporarily. But I'm not talking about Sam here. Everyone loves Sam, and rightfully so. Going into this character, this is Isildur, and yeah, this guy kind of got the short end of really everything because he just is thought of as the guy who said, I'm not going to destroy the ring, and then caused all these bad things to happen when really that isn't the case. Yeah, he said he wasn't going to destroy the ring, and he doesn't do it, but he actually does in the books come to the realization that I should have destroyed this, and goes to Elrond to go and give him the ring, and that's why the ring betrays him. He is ultimately he's a really good person. He goes and he, alongside his brother and his father, go and take the loyal people of Numenor to go and go to Middle Earth. He manages to save the White Tree, and he's ultimately a really good person. He is a heroic figure, and he also is not the one who defeated Sauron. It was his father and Gil-galad in the books. But he just simply cuts the ring from Sauron's finger and takes it. They never even go to Mount Doom itself, and ultimately it's just a very tragic character who really suffers through losing just so much, and then he goes and decides, well, Sauron is dead and doesn't know that Sauron would be coming back, so he was just going to take the ring as his prize of victory. Both Elrond and I believe Círdan tried to talk him into destroying it, but with the fact that he literally just lost his father and recently lost his brother, he just wasn't willing to listen to them, and this is definitely part of his downfall. And the scene that makes people think of it is just when he says no and walks out. And then there's also conversations that Aragorn has how he doesn't want to be Isildur, but Isildur was still a really great man, and he just does so much for Middle Earth, its people, and to go and protect everyone. He ultimately does have a moment of weakness like these others, but just the entire thing is that this moment of weakness was, yeah, something that definitely should have not happened, and he could have went and ended everything, although, as I said, no one could have really destroyed the ring in that situation, and someone would have had to probably do something similar to Gollum and fight over it and have it knocked in. Or one of the elves just could have, like, had him hold it in a chain, and they could have just like knocked it out of his hand or something. But ultimately, it's just a great tragedy with everything that happened to him. As I said, he is blamed just so much for the mistakes he made, but no one really talks about the good things he did. Everyone just thinks he's this guy who arrogantly decided, yeah, I'm going to keep this ring and that's it. But he was a heroic figure. He did so much good and helped save so many lives. He made a single mistake, which he was going to correct when he was killed. And just most people don't understand that. And there's only him and Denethor were the two main reasons I wanted to do this because they just get blamed so much for the mistakes they made, even though it is totally understandable why they made them and what pushed them to make these mistakes. But honestly, I want to know what you think. Please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next episode of Legends and Theories. Thank you for watching this episode of Legends and Theories. Please subscribe, like the video, share the video, leave a comment, check out the video on screen, and may the Force be with you.